Kia ora koutou katoa, nau mai hara mai ki te ao Hākinakina, your sports show right here on your Tribal Pulse, te kore mako o Taranaki, 94.8 FM and 98.4 FM. Well, she is a proud mana wahine from Taranaki ki Tonga who brings whakapapa leadership and sport together. She has recently stepped into the role of General Manager of the Taranaki Airs, and she carries with her deep connections to whānau, hapū and community. We're excited to kōrero to her about her journey, her love for sport and her vision for basketball rangatahi here in Taranaki. Nau mai hara mai Puawai Waller, welcome to the show.
Nā tēnā koe Caps, o sira tēnā tātou. Excited to be here.
Cool, awesome. Good to have you on the show. I mentioned earlier we were just having a little chat. I think Maddie jumped in before me and got an interview nice and early with Puawai, but we got you now on Te Ao Hākinakina, so looking forward to it. But hey, just to get started, can you share with us like where you're from, where you were raised, and the places and people that kind of help shape you into the mana wahine that you are today?
O tira tēnā tātou, ko Puawai Waller / Hudson tōku ingoa, he rui tēnei o ngā iwi katoa o Taranaki maunga, i rangi e nei waiwai e rua, e noho ki runga i te waka o Aotea, ko ngā rua hine rangi i tōku tūranga waiwai me ki. I think in terms of my journey, I grew up all over the place really, like born in Huntly, grew up like Tauranga, Rotorua, Auckland, spent some time down in Wallis and came home eventually when my karawa got sick. And I think in terms of my journey, I've been really privileged to have a lot of people open doors for me. And, reflecting on that is about, if there's a young person, if there's a rangatahi Māori listening to this who has ambitions, to just find people in your communities who are willing to open doors for you, because realistically, that's how I've advanced my career. It hasn't been through necessarily my own skill set. It's not been just me alone, but it's been put in rooms where people have been willing to take a chance on me. And I think, that's paid off in the end, but it's really, as a young wahine Māori, being willing to step into rooms that maybe I wasn't exactly ready to step into, and just taking the chance and taking the risk. And I think one of the things my mum instilled in me is that, there's greatness within everyone, and my responsibility is to unlock that potential within me. And I think for all of our rangatahi, specifically around Taranaki, coming home, I saw that there was a lack of exposure to opportunities, specifically for our kids in South Taranaki. But, if I could say one thing to them, it's like, believe in the greatness within you, because it's within you. And he mea tuku iho tēnei, hara i te mea nō kua nō tēnei, and e rangi he mea tuku iho nā o ku tupuna. And my responsibility within that potential is to deliver it, because there's impact and there's outcomes that reach beyond me. And so that's a large part of stepping into this mahi, is really, I'm not like a big basketball, sport fanatic. Like, I grew up playing sports, but my passion is actually in business. And so for me, when I saw this franchise and when I was approached about this mahi, I thought about our kids, and I said, man, what if this franchise doesn't exist in 15 years when our kids are ready to inherit it or to be on the roster? And so I felt like a really big responsibility to our kids, particularly our rural kids who are full of potential but don't always have those pathways available to them.
Wow, I love that. You spoke about being in those spaces with some of the elders and that, and having that opportunity put in front of you, and what a great bit of advice there for some of our rangatahi out there to really step into those spaces. And lovely to have you at the helm, and we're going to talk to that mahi that you're doing shortly. But you mentioned sports, and not really much of a sports fanatic, but growing up, what was there any sports that were a part of your world, and what did those sports give you as a young person, both on and off the field, or on and off the court?
Yeah, I was a sport fanatic growing up, actually. I played every sport under the sun, and pretty much at every level to nationals, netball, basketball, sevens, touch, whakama. I played every sport I could get on. And I think for me, like a kid growing up in adversity, sports was an outlet of how do I keep my pathway clear, and I had dreams, I had aspirations, but not necessarily the environment that was nurturing that. And I found sport for Māori kids particularly was one way that we could stay on a path that was moving us forward towards something. But also specifically team sport, there's a lot of good values that come out of that, like resilience, endurance, how to work together, how to provide value. And there's different forms of leadership that you learn along the way. And so I was a sport fanatic, and I love sport like it was my bread and butter day and night, sport and academics growing up. So it's kind of funny that, like, as an adult, it doesn't really translate for me. But I think when we had our preseason in Hāwera the other day, and for me, the magic is in seeing our tamariki. And I come back to it because just seeing them get free merch and getting that merch signed, and that magic that exists for those kids, that they can aspire, that they can have touch points with who they want to become. To me, that's really what I'm passionate about. And so I think, maybe I am in the right role, even though I'm like, sometimes I'm like, okay, basketball franchise, okay, this is interesting.
So cool. I love that. Now, obviously, your marae pā hapū kia ora. Now, how do your connections to your marae pā hapū and iwi continue to kind of ground you in the spaces that you're in, especially now that you step into, high profile leadership roles within sports?
Yeah, I think you'd appreciate this story. A couple of weeks ago, I took my nephew, Manakitia, with me to one of our trainings, and he was talking about, him and his bros talking about the Taranaki Airs, and they were like, he was like, yeah, auntie, they don't believe me. They don't believe that you're the GM of this franchise. I said, oh, why is that, Baba? And he goes, because all they know you is the girl that walks around the pā wearing a shorts and singlet. They said, like, there's no way she could be there. And that's awesome to me. Like, that's their reference points of who I am. And so for me, the idea that such a reality is so intangible, for them to imagine that one of us are capable of achieving that, that's the thing that I need to make more tangible, and I need to have a greater responsibility to it. And so I think, like, stepping into this space, and I was really clear with leadership about this, is it's not about whether I choose the Māori style of leadership or te ao Pākehī and Western standards of operating in business, but I come as I am, and all I know is taku ao Māori, really. And so when I'm in hard spaces and having to have harder conversations, which is 100% what's happening, and I'm in this rebuilding phase, a lot of the foundational principles that are helping me navigate the challenges are the principles that my karawa have taught me. And so, it's not one or the other, it's just that's who I am, and so that's how I lead. And I was very clear about that from the start. Like, I don't know another way to lead, and I don't want to know another way to lead, because I think the Māori style of leadership is perfectly suited to lead a sports franchise in a way perhaps that's not familiar to the sporting world.
Beautiful. I absolutely love that. And that's why I was so excited when I seen you take the role. I was like, wow, how cool is this for basketball, especially here in Taranaki? And we're going to talk more to that soon, whānau. But before we do, we're just going to go to a quick break and be back shortly. Kia ora koutou whānau, welcome back to Te Ao Hākinakina. We're here with Puawai Waller. We're having an awesome kōrero about her time as a young kōtiro in sports, and also time on the marae pā and with her hapū and with her iwi. And now we're stepping into her new role, having a kōrero about her new role. Now, your journey into leadership, your pathway into sports leadership, hasn't been a straight line. What experience or kaupapa prepared you for this role with the Taranaki Airs, do you think?
That's a good question. I almost felt like this opportunity had been a convergence of my life in terms of the skills I've been fortunate to acquire. And as I mentioned earlier, like, I've spent a lot of my career in rooms years before I should have probably been in those rooms. Like, I can remember early on in my career in the Māori mental health space, being on governance boards where I I was for sure that the only one under 50. And that's been kind of the theme throughout my career, is that I've just had people pour into me earlier than I should have been given, and that's been a great privilege. And so there's been a lot of tools that I've been fortunate to grab along the way. But I think ultimately, probably what differentiates me is probably the good starting point for this conversation. And it's really that, you know, there's a industry standard process of how GMs operate across sporting codes. And so part of my differentiation is actually who I am, and that's a young wahine Māori, and that comes with different life experiences, but also a really strong passion for business and strategy particularly, which you'll know is kind of my big point. And I think for where this franchise is at the moment, that's kind of the intersection point that the franchise needed. They needed someone who was grounded in Taranaki firstly. They needed someone who was invested in the community. They needed someone who had strong business practices, but they also needed someone who had a strong enough vision for the franchise that they could push it through the current state of the organization, which this year is about rebuilding. And rebuilding isn't hard, you know. In New Zealand, we're really invested in our sports teams. And so when the fans feel like there's a level of disconnection, you know, that causes a lot of upset. So it's really about giving the franchise back to the community, but also ensuring that there's a strong enough vision to create a sustainable commercial model moving forward.
Beautiful. Well, you definitely tick a lot of those boxes, and really excited with what's to come with the Taranaki Airs. So the brand and the vision, you know, when you think about the Taranaki Airs brand, what does it stand for? And what is the long-term vision for you and the club and the team in our community, our province?
Yeah, I think when it comes to sports franchises, they're really interesting, right? Especially regional franchises. Essentially what they try to become is a personification of the regional identity, because a large part of what pulls the fan base in is actually regional pride. And so, you know, pulling back a bit before we even get into who are the Taranaki Airs, it's really about looking at our region and saying, who are we as a people, as a region, and then also what are the intersecting points of cultural moments that are relevant to our current fan base. So our fan base is largely under 35 as a league, and so that's a young, diverse fan base. It's not quite, I think that's the opportunity, like they're more digitally native, they're more willing to have change have happened. And so, you know, there's some key themes about who we are as Taranaki that, you know, will be synonymous with us: resilience, endurance, humility. Those are really probably the key values that I'm pushing for in terms of the franchise and in terms of change. Resilience in the fact that, you know, in this industry, it's not a matter of if things go wrong, it's when things go wrong and who we are in it, and whilst we navigate those challenges. And humility in the fact that, you know, the sum total of value that we can provide as a franchise is greater than any one sum total value of an individual. So the franchise is always going to be bigger than me. It's going to be bigger than any individual player on our roster. It's going to be bigger than any one person who ever steps foot into our door. And I think that idea of humility is really important to me, to understand that, you know, this franchise, its purpose is to serve the future of our region, not necessarily just the present moment and just the present staff and employees. It's actually about the future of our kids and the opportunity we can create for a basketball development pipeline for them.
Beautiful. And I love that. And speaking about the future, how do you see the Airs kind of impacting the lives of rangatahi, you know, whether it's through aspiration, identity, or opportunity, or simply, you know, believing that they belong? What does that look like for our rangatahi into the future?
Yeah, I think there's a few key points, but I think one thing I'm really clear of is we don't need to create anything new. It's more about strengthening the parts we have already. So coming back to that preseason game and seeing those kids, you know, what we need to do is enhance those magical moments that are really, really important to our fans, and to our kids seeing themselves in our players. I think secondly, the basketball development pipeline, working with our local associations, working with Basketball Taranaki, those are really important aspects to ensure that the pipeline of development from an 8-year-old kid who just developed a passion for basketball all the way through to becoming a Taranaki Airs player is that pipeline, and does it exist firstly all the way through, and then what are the wraparound supports, where are the gaps and where are the needs. And so that's currently what I'm looking at, and it's not a rush into the process and into the answer. It's about sitting with those associations who this is their everyday life, you know, that they're the parents, of the kids who are currently going through this pipeline. And so really listening first before we jump to a conclusion about where we are best placed along that pipeline, and just filling the need and filling the gap, not trying to do more than we need to, but understanding there's an ecosystem that already exists, and our one is about enhancing that and strengthening the professionalisation pathway.
Beautiful. I love that. Love that. They're definitely our future. So when you look ahead, 5 to 10 years, what would success look like for you? Like, not just for the Airs as a team, but for basketball here, for our, within our region, for our whānau. What does success look like for you?
Yeah, we have a few players go over to America for college basketball, and that's really amazing. I would like to strengthen that pipeline and to build better relationships with international universities to get our kids over there, but also to create a stronger basketball ecosystem here on the ground. But I think in terms of like the growth that I want to achieve personally, if this is a question more so about myself than the franchise, I'm here really to strengthen my business practices and to ensure that, I understand what leadership really is, because these words get flung around in te ao Māori quite often, koe te rangatira o te ao for XYZ, and I just never understood it. And actually being in this role has forced me to really wānanga with myself about actually what type of leader do you want to be. And the more I think about it, the more I have wānanga, the more I realize actually this isn't a skill that's well taught anymore, in terms of how we're bringing up the next generation of leaders and ensuring that they're values led, and that actually it's not about in the good times what type of leader you are, it's actually in the bad times what type of leader you are and how do you navigate those hard spaces. And so I feel like I'm getting in a crash course in that at the moment. And it's been a good challenge, I think, for me, because I've often just been able to coast by, but this time I've had to be really intentional and think through, some of the teachings of my karawa, and how does that actually apply when you're looking at a P&L? How does that actually apply when you're developing operational processes? And you see kind of the dichotomy of leadership that exists within Māori, kaupapa Māori, and then te ao Pākehē, and you see why there's such a differentiation. And so just trying to find a balance where I understand my integrity is still in line with who I am as a uri of Taranaki firstly, and then I think secondly to ensure that I'm here to grow my skills as a wahine who's passionate about te ao Pākehē, and so ensuring that I can do both but whilst living out my values is really important to me, and that's probably like my key focus.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Puawai, thank you so much for coming on the show to share your vision, to share the vision for the Taranaki Airs and for our province in basketball. It's clear that, the role is so much more than basketball. For you, it's about people, it's about identity, it's about creating pathways for our rangatahi, our next generation. And we wish you and the Taranaki Airs all the very, very best. We'll all be shouting on the sidelines. I love going to the basketball nights. They're awesome nights. So thanks, Ed, for all the work that you do, and really excited for what's to come. So thanks again.
Taiwa, Caps. Taiwa.